We thank Reverend Dr. Barber for joining us from Goldsboro, North Carolina, and our best wishes and prayers are with him and this whole campaign as we go forward. At this point, I want to introduce someone who in DC needs really no introduction. Reverend Graylin Hegler, who is the Tri-Chair of the Poor People's Campaign DC Coordinating Committee, pastor of Plymouth Congregational Church, and the Director of Faith Strategies. And so please welcome Reverend Graylin.
I want to thank Dr. Liz, and I want to thank all of you for being here. And as we heard Reverend Dr. Barber lift up, was that the issue is that we're not fighting for, but we're fighting with. We're not marching for, but we're marching with. And so therefore, we're going to hear from these testifiers that are here to talk about their issues. But you know, these are not the only voices out there, but these are some of the voices out there. And we will continue to hear more and more of the voices that will educate us about why we need to keep this passion alive, why we need to be in the streets, and why we need to continue to lift up our challenge to authority to be converted and to understand what justice is all about. And so you're going to hear from Mark Charles, who's going to speak to us about systemic racism. And Mark Charles is the son of an American woman of Dutch heritage and a Navajo man. He speaks with insight into the complexities of American history regarding race, culture, and faith in order to help forge a path of healing and conciliation for the nation. And then we're also going to hear from Sister Anna Rodon, who is going to speak to us also of systematic racism in terms of immigration. She works with many languages, one voice, and the Terrence Sterling movement. Dreamers, and she continues on her personal advocacy to bring transformation to the community in all of her endeavors. And then we will also hear from Dana Pope, talking about poverty, as an activist who tries to connect the different groups she organizes with, because our struggles and our liberation are intertwined. She teaches workshops on conflict transformation, anti-oppression, and relationship building, and is a member of the Washington Ethical Society. We will also hear from Rhonda Hamilton on ecological devastation, and she is an advisory neighborhood commissioner and a president of Synapse Gardens Residential Council, a native Washingtonian, and have been advocating for her community because they are being exposed to environmental hazards in the places in which they live. And then we will hear from Brock McIntosh on the war economy. And Brock is an Afghanistan war veteran who served 8 years with the Army National Guard. He is a member of About Face, a veteran-led movement against militarism, a certified Kenyan nonviolent trainer, and an advocate for veteran health. We will hear from them as they come forward to lift up their concerns, their issues, and also to engage and embrace us in the work that they do.
Yate. First of all, just a side note, you should never give the mic first to a native. You have color people time, we have Navajo time, native time. You ain't seen nothing yet. Before we start, I want to just ask if there's anyone in the room here who is from the Piscataway or the Haudenosaunee tribes. Okay? I ask because it's the Piscataway who were ethnically cleansed from this land. They were the ones who lived here. They were the ones who hunted and fished here. They lived along the Potomac. And they, along with the Haudenosaunee, were the ones who were ethnically removed from this area so that the nation's capital could be built and so that white settlement could move in. And so I would just like everyone to give a round of applause for the Piscataway and the Haudenosaunee because of it's important that we acknowledge the people who have stewarded this land. It's important that we acknowledge that these lands were not discovered. In my presentation here, which I will do my best to keep to 3 minutes, I want to help you understand what it feels like from a systemic racism standpoint to be Native in the United States, especially around the celebration of holidays. We'll start simple. Columbus Day. Okay? It's quite obvious to anyone that you cannot discover lands already inhabited. If you don't believe me, leave your cell phones, your car keys, your wallets out. I'll come by and discover them for you. Clearly, this is not discovery. This is stealing. This is colonizing. This is conquering. And yet we have a statue just a few miles away from here honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. This is a problem for Native peoples. Second, another holiday. Well, you'll remember about 3 years ago, we had a dialogue about the appropriateness of the Confederate flag. It was actually taken off of a Capitol building by an activist. This was in the spring of 2015. And I watched this with great interest because this was a good conversation. We had to have this. We needed to discuss this. But then I was really intrigued because just a few weeks after this dialogue died down, everyone took the day off. They bought their hot dogs. They bought their fireworks. And they went out to celebrate another piece of systemic racism within our country, which is the Declaration of Independence. You may not know this, but 30 lines after the sentence, all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. Making it very clear the only reason our founding fathers used this inclusive term, all men, is because they had a very narrow definition of who was actually human. Now that brings us to today, President's Day, Abraham Lincoln's birthday. I'm going to say some history many of you may know. I know I will present some that none of you have never heard of before. In 1858, President Lincoln, in his first debate with Stephen Douglas, he said there was a physical difference between the white and the black man, which will never allow them to be on equal footing. I have no intention to make voters or jurors of Negroes, nor to allow them to vote, nor to allow them to intermarry with us. And as long as there must be a position of superior and inferior, I believe the race to which I belong will always be the superior race. President Lincoln said the same thing almost verbatim in the fourth debate with Stephen Douglas. In his inauguration, he said, I have no intention to free the slaves, for slavery already exists. And if you want to know how I feel about the races and black people, go back and read what I've said before. And then he quoted himself from the first debate. In 1862, when Horace Greeley called for the immediate emancipation of the slaves, Abraham Lincoln said, my primary objective in this struggle is not to save or destroy slavery. It is to preserve the Union. If I could save the Union without freeing a single slave, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. That quote is hanging at the Lincoln Memorial stating for anyone who comes in, according to Abraham Lincoln, black lives don't matter. Now you all know that when he emancipated the slaves, he didn't free all of them. Now what you may not know is that Abraham Lincoln used the pretext of the Civil War to further the campaigns against Indian people. December 26th of 1862, President Abraham Lincoln ordered the largest mass execution in the history of our nation with the hanging of the Dakota 38. In 1864, a U.S. Army under the command of Commander-in-Chief Abraham Lincoln came across Cheyenne and Arapaho men, women, and children, 200 of them encamped over a hillside in Colorado. They were waving a white flag of surrender and an American flag, and they ordered all of them slaughtered. It was later reported that the soldiers paraded their genitalia down the streets of Denver. In 1861, they stepped up their campaigns against the Navajo and the Pueblo in New Mexico. In August of 1863, a general of the U.S. Army gave this order to one of the soldiers. He said, henceforth every Navajo male is to be killed or taken prisoner on sight. Say to them, go to the Bosque Redondo or we will pursue you and destroy you. We will not make peace with you or any other terms. This war shall be pursued until you cease to exist or move. There can be no talk on the subject. And then they rounded up over 8,000 Navajo men, women, and children and marched us down to Bosque Redondo in what is known as the Long Walk. I want to say this. As a Navajo man, I find many of the holidays celebrated by the United States of America lamentable. 4th of July, Columbus Day, Thanksgiving. But President's Day, the fact that as a nation we celebrate Abraham Lincoln's birthday and have whitewashed the exploits of a racist, genocidal, ethnic cleansing president like Abraham Lincoln is ethically, politically, socially, and morally reprehensible. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not going to keep you here long. I don't know how to talk that pretty, but I got a message for you. My name is Ana Rondon. I'm from the Dominican Republic. I am a dreamer. My mother is the original dreamer. So I don't know how they want me to support for me to stay here for my mother to go. So I'm here on behalf of the immigrants. I'm asking for you to understand that anything out here that affects my family in the United States or in the world will affect all of us. Because we are one. We are one. God made us the way we are on purpose. We are unique. We are the beautiful garden that God made. And my message to all of you, I just want to tell you, for my immigrant who came from Dominican Republic and did not know that my color was a problem. My color was never a problem to me, but now it is because I live in the United States. But I'm also a mother of 6 non-white children, and that worries me to death because a gentleman of name Terrence Sterling was shot and killed because he was not white. And as a mom, that brings a big concern to me because I know even though I make sure my kids get a vital education, try to get an equal education for them, that might not help them at all because the education is not helping us out here. So I want you to remember that Black lives do matter. I am Afro-Latino. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. I'm worried. I need for y'all to understand that I need all of y'all, every one of y'all, for me, my kids, my community, and everyone who lives in the world to survive. So just keep in mind, please, I might get y'all tired with this, but I need y'all to survive. Thank you, y'all.
I'm Dana Pope. Poverty is relative. When I was a kid, I didn't know how much money my parents or anyone else's parents made. All I knew was that my family seemed to have less stuff that other kids took for granted. I was made fun of by the other kids at church for only having one pair of church shoes that I wore every Sunday. I felt like I had to hide the fact, as best I could, that my clothes mostly came from yard sales and thrift stores. I saw how other kids who weren't as able to hide it or who came to school with a stain on their clothes were mercilessly teased and bullied. We never went hungry, but we often ate things like hot dogs, bologna sandwiches, and ramen noodles. Besides being cheap, my younger sister and I were able to prepare them for ourselves when our parents were working and we were alone. As an adult, my world has vastly expanded, and the impact of poverty on my life has become both more obvious and painful. I live with my husband in my in-laws' basement because we cannot afford to pay rent. We both make well below the poverty line. Many things that middle-class people take for granted are out of reach for us. We have tens of thousands of dollars in student loans and can't afford to pay enough to cover the interest each month. We don't have enough savings or income to cover most unexpected expenses. People at our congregation ask us where we're going on vacation in the summer, but that's not really something we can afford. We keep putting off having a baby because we don't have stable income, but considering I'm 37, our window is going to close soon. People in situations like mine and worse are constantly told by society that we aren't good enough, that there's something wrong with us, we aren't trying hard enough, and that we deserve what little we have and no more. All of this is false. The reality is that poverty is created by decisions that our society makes. Everyone deserves to have a place to live. No one should ever go hungry because there is enough food in the world to feed everyone. No one should ever go without medicine or other health care because they can't afford it. These are things that every member of my family has gone through. My brother has suffered the worst physically. He has been unable to work for years and was repeatedly denied disability and the Medicare that comes with it until recently. Because he couldn't get regular health care, he didn't have treatment for complications with diabetes until they had to amputate his lower leg to save his life. Now his kidneys are beginning to fail, and he is housing insecure and has been homeless for much of the last year. If he doesn't have stable housing and show that he can pay for certain transplant expenses, he can't be on the transplant list. He's been on the Section 8 housing waiting list for years, but now he's in a wheelchair because he isn't strong enough to use a prosthetic, and the list is long. So he might end up dying if we can't raise enough money to keep him in his apartment. The whole situation is terrible and preventable. I am here as the person to talk about the evils of poverty, but I don't actually believe in evil. Most of what people call evil is what happens when we humans get disconnected and stop seeing each other's full humanity. The same is true of poverty. We are taught that poverty is the fault of the individual, and we are encouraged to stigmatize and ostracize poor people. The reality is that poverty is largely a result of factors that we as individuals have little control over. Was I born to parents who have inherited wealth? Do I live in an area of the country where jobs have vanished because of automation? As a society, we have policies and institutions that create and reinforce poverty. But what we know here in the Poor People's Campaign is that if people made it, then we can change it. We can push for equitable distribution of resources so that these evils are eradicated once and for all. Thank you.
First, I'd like to give honor to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. My heart was convicted the other day to a homeless man on the metro train. He was asking other people on the train for money. No one on that end of the train had money for him or offered him money. That really bothered the man, and he said in response that the poor will always be with you. And he turned to the lady on his left and said, maybe your life will be a little better if you help me. I quickly realized that the Lord was speaking to me through the man on the train. As I advocate for my community and for us to live in an environment that is free of hazards, I'm also begging and pleading for others to help us or for someone to simply care, just as the man on the train. I'm here today to speak up for my community. I'm here today to share our story. Many of us, like myself, live in public and subsidized housing in Southwest. And each day we face the health consequences of living near and beside cement plants in a highly contaminated, massive brownfield site that reduces our life expectancies and makes it hard for us to breathe. This is not a story that you will hear on 11 o'clock news. And this is one story that some would prefer that I not share. But I'm here today to continue to break the silence and barriers of environmental oppression that have hurt my people. We are low to moderate income residents whose lives are being sacrificed to redevelop and construct a soccer stadium and to make way for the creation of high-end market rate housing complexes as our lives are being shattered. The residents near Buzzard Point wake up and have their breakfast with the smell of diesel fumes from hundreds of trucks and particulate matter that gets readily ingested into our lungs and vital organs that are hurting our bodies every day. We inhale this air with known carcinogenic particulates. This explains why we have high rates of asthma, respiratory ailments, heart disease, cancer, and a number of our residents are cancer survivors. When children and vulnerable residents, including ones near Buzzard Point, are purposely exposed to chemicals, poor air quality, and hazardous environmental waste, every person that hears their story should be motivated to take action against these injustices. It should be such a basic human right for us to live in a community and in this city that we help to build and build up, free of these hazards. I'm hoping, like the man on the train, that you will hear this story and it will motivate you to want to help us. The power is in your hands.
I'm here to speak to you today about militarism. And as an Afghanistan war veteran, I wanted to highlight one of Dr. King's critique of militarism when he said this way of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into people's normally humane cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. And I'd like to tell you all today about the moment I realized there was poison in my veins. I'm the child of a nurse and a factory worker from the heartland of Illinois, a working class family, and when I was in high school at the height of the Iraq War, military recruiters, they had sign-up bonuses and college assistance that a lot of folks like myself saw as a way out. I saw it as a way up. I saw it as access to opportunities I wouldn't normally have. So when I was 18 years old, I joined the military, and 2 years later found myself standing over the body of a 16-year-old Afghan boy, not much younger than myself. This boy, he was a bomb maker. He was making a roadside bomb when it prematurely detonated, and his body was covered in shrapnel and burns. And he lay in front of me sedated because our medics had just amputated one of his hands. But on his other hand, I could see the callous roughness of a farmer or a shepherd. And because he was sedated, I could study the details and the humanity of his face, and I caught myself wanting him to live. This boy who is supposed to want to kill me, and I thought if he had known me, he wouldn't want to kill me. And here I am supposed to want to kill him, and feeling wrong because I want him to live. That's a poisoned mind. That's a militarized mind, and all the opportunities afforded me by the military cannot repay the cost that war takes on a person's soul. And it's always working class people. It's always working class people that have to bear the burden of war. A working class boy from Illinois sent halfway around the world to kill a young farmer. So how do we get here? How does this war economy come to be? Well, first you have the demand. I see my wife there. Sorry, I got distracted. I wasn't expecting to see her today. But for a war economy, you need the demand, right? A society that feels perpetually threatened, perpetually prepares for war, even in times of peace. And so you need a vast military-industrial complex and war economy whose charters and profits and stocks and jobs depend on permanent militarism and whose fortune prospers most in times of war. And the second thing you need supply. So a volunteer military, they need volunteers. And how do you do that? You do that with opportunities. And that attracts working class people who need opportunities. And so we need a Poor People's Campaign to amplify the voices of regular people above the military-industrial lobby and demand jobs for working class people outside of war making. and to demand opportunities for working class people that don't require killing other working class people. We need a poor people's campaign to demand justice for people of color who are killed by a militarized police force. War always has a way of distracting us. It always has a way of perverting our priorities. And so we need a poor people's campaign to force our priorities to the forefront. And we need to organize for economic, racial, and ecological justice to force those issues to the front and rectify our nation's agenda. Thank you.
Let us give a thanks for our testifiers, reminding us of why we march and why we agitate, reminding us that who is us, that they are us and we are them.